A Simplex converted to a Great Western Railway Prairie tank. Part 91. Fixing the running boards in place, fitting the brake shaft and making a locking collar for it, plus refitting the link to operate the cylinder drains. I thought I would do this sequence of small jobs because I can't do anything with the boiler until the paint has thoroughly dried. Both of the running boards are a very good fit, and surprisingly they're only held in place using two small 7BA countersunk bolts on each of the running boards. And luckily I have plenty of these in my small box of 7BA countersunk bolts. A viewer commented on how useful it was to put things in little boxes, and even though I work in organised chaos, I would agree with that. It saves a lot of time looking around for the parts that you need. Luckily, the 7BA bolts screw into brackets that have been threaded that are fastened to the buffer beams, so there's no need to mess about with very small nuts underneath. Talking about nuts, there was a squirrel sat eating the food on my bird table this morning. I watched it for a while I made a cup of tea, and it made a change from watching the small birds. Even though both of these running boards are held to the locomotive using a total of 4 7BA bolts, they do seem surprisingly rigid. The brake shaft screws into a die block, which in turn is connected to a lever, and with the help of some link rods, this lever controls the brake on and off mechanism. The only trouble is there's a part missing, so when I unscrew the brake lever, it comes out of the top of the column. What it needs is a collar to stop this from happening. Maybe the collar is in what's left of the box of bits, but I think I'll make a new one. For this job I'm going to use my small Myford lathe, which is right behind me when I'm sat at the workbench. I've fitted a piece of scrap brass into the chuck, and now it's time to turn it to the right diameter. I enjoy using this Myford lathe because it has a clutch, just like my Smart & Brown. My old Boxford lathe doesn't have a clutch, and every time I throw the switch, the power comes on and off with a bang. Well, not really with a bang, it comes on with a bit of a clunk, as the motor in the base starts to spin. I've done some work on this Myford, mainly adjusting things, and it appears to work very well indeed. Once I turned the piece of brass to the correct diameter, I used a very small centre drill to make a hole in the end, followed by a 5/32 of an inch twist drill. The brake shaft itself is 5/32 of an inch in diameter, and it's a very good fit into the 5/32 of an inch diameter hole. I don't need to use a reamer, it's not that accurate a part. Also, I don't really need to go very far down this piece of brass with the twist drill, just enough to make a small collar. Once I'd finished drilling the hole, I used the brake column to confirm it was the right size. And as you can see, it's a perfect fit. Next I parted off the piece of brass. This is the first time I've parted anything off in the Myford, and it seemed to work okay. The next part of making the collar was to drill a hole in the side of it and thread the hole 6BA. And once that had been done, I fitted a 6BA grub screw into the hole in the collar. And this is what will hold the collar against the shaft and stop it from moving. For the top part of the column, I was going to put a washer in between the handle and the column. But I didn't have one, so instead I quickly made my own. This one is a bit thick, but I think it will do what is required of it, just like one or two girlfriends I've had in the past. It looks okay, and it's mainly decorative anyway. That is the washer, not the girlfriend's. Now I can screw the brake shaft into the die block, and once I've done that, I'll just slide the collar up the brake shaft and lock it in place. And now whichever way I turn the handle, the die block goes up and down, and the handle doesn't pop up out of the top of the column. And here you can see just that, the handle stays in the right position. The next thing to do is to fit the mechanism that controls the cylinder drains. This is a lever connected to a long rod that has a bearing support in the centre, which in turn connects to a lever on a cross shaft, and that operates the drain cocks through yet another lever. If you look at the paintwork around this small bracket, it doesn't look too good, but it's very much like the paintwork on a full-size locomotive. This wouldn't be good on the smoke box or anywhere really conspicuous, but it's okay here. It actually adds in its own way a bit of scale authenticity. Don't forget that this model locomotive is old, and I'm quite happy with it looking that way. Here's a centre bearing that supports the long rod. You know, there is a much easier and quicker way of doing this using a Bowden cable. On some locomotives in the past I've used a piece of copper tubing with a length of silver solder rod instead of the usual stranded steel Bowden cable. Because a long silver solder rod inside a piece of copper tube with plenty of oil will be low friction and it won't go rusty. And by using a Bowden cable, you only have one end for the lever and the other end to move a lever on a cross shaft which opens and closes the cylinder drains. Very simple. This is an 8BA bolt and it was a bit long for the job and it was very fiddly to fit. I'm using a nut spinner on one end and a spanner on the other. And after I tightened the nut, I just cut off the surplus thread, and the subsequent distortion of the threads where I cut it off stops the nut from working loose. Here you see the complete principle. Look how many linkages there are. Here I'm testing the mechanical principle of the linkage. I'm moving the lever very fast to make sure that the linkage doesn't break, and it doesn't. Everything's fine. That's another few small jobs out of the way, and now at episode 91, the series is almost complete, but not quite. I still have to put right the paint issue on the boiler barrel, but I did that on purpose, so it's no big deal. If all else fails, I'll remove the paint and just repaint it properly. And that's it for this episode. Stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.